The summer sun shone brightly over Cedar Point Amusement Park on a warm Saturday morning in June. Staff Sergeant James Morrison stood at the park entrance, holding his 8-year-old daughter Sarah's small hand in his rough, calloused one. At 34, James cut an impressive figure 6 feet tall, with a military straight posture and short-cropped dark hair showing touches of gray at the temples. His body was lean and fit from years of service, but today he wore civilian clothes. A simple blue t-shirt, cargo shorts, and comfortable walking shoes. Sarah could barely contain her excitement, bouncing on her toes as they waited in line for tickets. Her brown pigtails bobbed with each jump, and her daddy's little princess t-shirt sparkled with pink glitter in the morning light. James couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. It had been 14 months since Head last seen her, having just returned from his 3rd tour in Afghanistan 2 weeks ago. "Daddy, look at that roller coaster." Sarah pointed at the massive steel structure looming above them. "Can we ride that one first? Please, please, please?" Her big brown eyes, so much like her mother's, looked up at him pleadingly. "We'll get to all of them, sweetheart," James promised, his deep voice gentle. "But let's start with something a little smaller first." He remembered how his own father had taken him to his first amusement park, teaching him to work up to the bigger rides gradually. As they moved through the entrance gates, James took in every detail of the park with the careful awareness that had become second nature during his military service. He noticed the security cameras, the positions of the park staff, and the various exits, not out of paranoia but from years of trained habit. However, today his focus was primarily on creating happy memories with his daughter. The park was starting to fill up with other families, the air thick with the smell of cotton candy and popcorn and the sound of distant screams from thrill-seekers on rides. Sarah's eyes grew wide at the sight of a cotton candy vendor, and James bought her a large pink cloud of the sugary treat. As she took her first bite, leaving a sticky residue around her mouth, James pulled out a tissue from his pocket. Another habit from both military life and fatherhood: always be prepared. They started their day with the carousel, Sarah choosing a magnificent white horse with a flowing golden mane. James stood beside her, one hand steadying her, even though she insisted she was old enough to ride by herself. As the carousel spun, playing its cheerful music, he watched his daughter's face light up with pure joy. These were the moments he had dreamed about during long nights in the barracks thousands of miles away. "Did you see me, Daddy? I rode it all by myself," Sarah exclaimed as they stepped off the ride, conveniently forgetting his helping hand. "You sure did, Princess. You're getting so big," James replied, his heart swelling with pride and a touch of sadness at how much she had grown during his deployment. Her 8th birthday party had been celebrated over a video call, with him watching from his base as she blew out the candles. They worked their way through the park, trying various kid-friendly rides. James bought them both hot dogs for lunch, and they sat on a bench watching people walk by. Sarah chatted excitedly about school, her friends, and how she had learned to ride a bike while he was away. James listened intently, treasuring every word and making mental notes of all the milestones he had missed. "Mom says you're a hero," Sarah said suddenly, taking a big bite of her hot dog. "She says you keep people safe." James paused, carefully considering his response. "I just try to do what's right, sweetheart. Sometimes being brave means knowing when to be kind, when to walk away, and when to stand up for others who need help." Sarah nodded solemnly, though James wasn't sure how much of that she understood. They finished their lunch and headed toward the line for a moderately sized roller coaster, Sarah's first real thrill ride. As they waited in line, James felt completely at peace. The weight of his recent deployment seemed to lift from his shoulders as he focused entirely on this precious time with his daughter. Little did he know that this peaceful father-daughter moment was about to be interrupted by events that would put both his military training and his principles to the test. As James and Sarah waited patiently in line for the roller coaster, the peaceful atmosphere of their perfect day began to shift. The queue area was packed with families, and the afternoon sun beat down on the waiting crowd. Sarah was telling her father about her recent school play when the first rumble of motorcycles caught James' attention. 5 bikers strutted into the queue area, their heavy boots thudding against the pavement. They wore black leather vests covered in patches, with a distinctive emblem showing a red skull with crossed chains on the back. The leader, a tall man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, stood out from the rest. His weathered face and cold eyes surveyed the crowd like a predator sizing up potential prey. James instinctively pulled Sarah a little closer, his military training kicking in as he observed the group. The bikers weren't just ordinary motorcycle enthusiasts out for a fun day. Their aggressive body language and intimidating presence sent families shuffling uncomfortably away from them. They reeked of cigarettes and stale beer, suggesting they'd started their day early at a nearby bar. "Move it, people," the snake-tattooed leader barked, shoving past a young couple who had been waiting for nearly an hour. His friends laughed, following his lead as they cut through the line. Parents pulled their children aside, avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to challenge the group. "Daddy, why are those men being mean?" Sarah whispered, gripping her father's hand tighter. Her earlier excitement had been replaced by anxiety. "Just stay close to me, sweetheart," James replied calmly, keeping his voice steady to reassure her. He watched as the bikers continued their path of disruption, now only about 20 people ahead of where he and Sarah stood. One of the bikers, a shorter man with a scraggly beard, started making crude comments about a teenage girl's outfit. Her father stepped forward to protest but quickly backed down when all 5 bikers turned to face him, cracking their knuckles menacingly. The girl's family quietly left the line, the father's face red with helpless anger. The park staff member manning the ride entrance looked nervous, repeatedly touching his radio but seemingly unsure whether to call for security. He was young, probably a college student working a summer job, and clearly out of his depth with the situation. James carefully assessed each member of the group, noting their positions and body language, an automatic response from years of combat training. Besides the leader and the short one, there was a heavy-set man with brass knuckles partly visible in his vest pocket, a tall lanky one with a shaved head, and a muscular guy with a distinctive limp suggesting an old injury to his right leg. "Hey, Grandpa!" the leader shouted at an elderly man who didn't move aside quickly enough. "You deaf or something?" He shoved the older man, causing him to stumble against the queue railing. James felt his jaw tighten but maintained his composed exterior. He had dealt with far more dangerous situations in Afghanistan. These men were bullies, but he knew escalating the situation wouldn't help anyone. Still, he began mentally preparing for various scenarios, noting possible exit routes and keeping Sarah on his left side, away from the growing disturbance. The bikers had now successfully intimidated their way through about half the line, leaving a wake of frustrated and frightened parkgoers behind them. Some people were filming with their phones but keeping a safe distance. The thick summer air seemed to grow heavier with tension. Sarah pressed closer to her father as the group got nearer. "Maybe we should try a different ride," she suggested quietly, her earlier bravery diminishing. "It's okay, Sarah," James assured her, though his eyes never left the approaching group. "Sometimes we have to stand our ground when things aren't right, but I promise you're safe with me." The young ride operator finally made a call on his radio, speaking in hushed tones. James could hear him requesting security assistance, but knew it would take several minutes for them to arrive from their station near the park entrance. As the bikers drew closer to where James and Sarah stood, the air grew thick with anticipation. Other families in line watched nervously, wondering if this military-looking father and his young daughter would become the next targets of the group's intimidation. The peace of their perfect day had been shattered, and James knew that the next few moments would require all of his training and restraint to handle whatever was about to unfold. The distance between James, Sarah, and the troublesome bikers had shrunk to just a few feet when fate decided to intervene. Sarah, distracted by trying to stay close to her father, accidentally stumbled. The strawberry ice cream cone she had been holding slipped from her small hands, splattering across the leather boots of the biker with the snake tattoo. Time seemed to freeze for a moment as pink ice cream dripped down the polished black leather, creating a stark contrast that drew everyone's attention. The snake-tattooed leader looked down at his boots, then at Sarah, his face darkening like storm clouds gathering before a hurricane. "I'm sorry, Mr." Sarah squeaked, her voice trembling. "It was an accident." She pressed herself against her father's leg, feeling the solid strength of his presence. The 5 bikers quickly surrounded them, forming an intimidating circle. The crowd around them backed away further, creating an empty space that made the confrontation even more visible. Several phones were raised higher, their cameras recording what was unfolding. "Look what your little brat did to my $300 boots," the leader snarled, taking a step closer. His breath smelled of cigarettes and cheap whiskey as he leaned down toward Sarah. "Somebody's going to have to pay for this." James smoothly stepped between his daughter and the angry biker, positioning Sarah safely behind him. His movements were calm and precise, showing none of the tension that coursed through his body. His military training had taught him that appearing calm often proved more intimidating than showing anger. "Sir," James spoke in a clear, controlled voice that carried the natural authority of a staff sergeant who had commanded troops in combat zones. "My daughter apologized for the accident. I'm happy to pay for your boots to be cleaned." The heavy-set biker with brass knuckles laughed mockingly. "Hear that, Snake? This Boy Scout wants to pay for cleaning." He took a step closer, attempting to use his bulk to intimidate. "Maybe we want more than just cleaning money." James remained perfectly still, his eyes steady and alert. He noticed how the bikers had positioned themselves, Snake and the heavy-set one in front, the others moving to flank him. It was an amateur attempt at intimidation, but it told him they had some experience in street fights. "Your kid needs to learn some respect," the short, scraggly-bearded biker spat, trying to peek around James at Sarah, who was clutching the back of her father's shirt. "My daughter has shown respect by apologizing," James replied, his voice remaining measured but taking on a harder edge. "I'm trying to handle this reasonably. Let's not make this situation something we'll all regret." Snake's eyes narrowed at the implicit warning in James' words. He studied James more carefully now, noting his rigid posture and the way his feet were perfectly positioned for either defense or attack. Something in James' steady gaze made him hesitate momentarily. "You threatening us, tough guy?" the lanky biker with the shaved head demanded, moving closer to James' left side. "There's 5 of us and 1 of you." James turned his head slightly, keeping all 5 men in his peripheral vision while maintaining his protective stance in front of Sarah. The muscles in his arms remained relaxed but ready. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply suggesting we resolve this peacefully, especially in front of children." The crowd watching the confrontation had grown larger, with some parkgoers staying to watch while others hurried away. The young ride operator was now frantically speaking into his radio, clearly calling for immediate security assistance. "Daddy," Sarah whispered from behind him, her voice shaking. "I'm scared." Those 2 words sent a wave of controlled anger through James' body. These men weren't just troublemakers anymore. They were actively frightening his child. His combat-trained senses heightened, noting every subtle movement of the bikers and every shift in their stance. "Last chance," James said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had faced far worse situations than this. "Take the cleaning money, and we all go our separate ways." Snake stepped forward until he was inches from James' face, clearly unused to anyone standing up to him. "What, military boy? You gonna show us some of those fancy army moves?" The tension in the air was electric, and everyone watching knew that the next few seconds would determine whether this confrontation would end peacefully or explode into violence. James' mind was already running through defensive scenarios, calculating how to protect Sarah while neutralizing any threats without causing excessive harm. The moment of choice had arrived, and it was clear these bikers were about to learn a valuable lesson about judging a book by its cover. Snake's first mistake was assuming James' calm demeanor meant weakness. His second mistake was reaching past James, attempting to grab Sarah's arm to teach her a lesson about respect. Before his fingers could even brush Sarah's sleeve, James shifted with the fluid precision of a combat veteran. In one smooth motion, James moved Sarah 2 steps back while simultaneously blocking Snake's reach with his forearm. The movement was so quick and professional that it took everyone, especially the bikers, by surprise. There was no aggression in the action, just pure trained efficiency. "That," James said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made even hardened soldiers stand at attention, "was your first and final warning. Do not attempt to touch my daughter again." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, forming a wide circle around the confrontation. Phones were recording from every angle, and parents were using the situation as an impromptu lesson to their children about standing up to bullies. The young ride operator had finally gotten through to park security, who were reportedly on their way. Snake pulled his hand back, momentarily thrown off by Jameis' lightning-fast reflexes. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face as he recognized the practiced movement of a trained fighter. But pride and alcohol made him push forward instead of backing down. "You think you're tough, don't you?" Snake sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. He gestured to his companions, who began to spread out in a wider circle. "Let's see how tough you are against all of us." The heavy-set biker with brass knuckles started to reach into his vest pocket, but Jameis' voice cut through the tension like a knife. "The cameras are rolling," he stated matter-of-factly, nodding toward the dozens of phones pointed their way. "Think carefully about your next move. Assault charges look bad on a record." Sarah, still behind her father, had stopped trembling despite her fear. Seeing her father's calm strength gave her courage. She remembered what he had told her earlier about bravery and how sometimes it meant standing up for what was right. "Your daddy's about to learn a hard lesson, little girl," the short, scraggly-bearded biker taunted, trying to intimidate Sarah. His words had the opposite effect of what he intended. "My daddy's a soldier," Sarah replied proudly, her voice stronger than before. "He protects people from bad guys like you." Her words caused a ripple of murmurs through the watching crowd, and several people nodded in appreciation. A few veterans in the audience recognized Jameis' bearing and stance, understanding exactly what these bikers were getting themselves into. The lanky biker with the shaved head spat on the ground near Jameis' feet, a childish attempt at provocation. "Military boy thinks he's special. Been a while since you had any real action, hasn't it? Soldier might be a bit rusty." James remained still, his eyes constantly moving between the 5 men, tracking their positions and anticipating their likely moves. His mind flashed back to his hand-to-hand combat training, calculating angles and distances. These weren't trained fighters, their stances were sloppy, their attention divided. "Last chance," James announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Walk away now. There's no need for this to get ugly." His words carried no threat, just a simple statement of fact. Snake, however, was too far committed to back down now. His reputation among his gang was at stake. "Get him," he growled to his companions. "Teach both him and his brat some manners." As the bikers began to close in, James took a deep breath. He hadn't wanted this confrontation, had tried every reasonable way to avoid it. But now that it was inevitable, he would handle it with the same precision and control he had learned in the military. "Sarah," he said calmly, never taking his eyes off the approaching threats, "remember what I told you about closing your eyes during scary movies? Now would be a good time for that." The tension in the air reached its breaking point as Snake pulled back his fist, preparing to throw the first punch. In that moment, everyone watching knew they were about to witness something they'd never forget. The Day 5 overconfident bikers learned the hard way about judging a book by its cover. Snake's fist whistled through the air where Jameis' head had been a split second earlier, but James wasn't there anymore. With the practiced efficiency of countless hours of combat training, he had already shifted his weight, letting the punch sail past his ear while simultaneously pushing Sarah gently toward a nearby bench. "Stay there, sweetheart," James commanded calmly, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding. A female parkgoer quickly moved to stand with Sarah, understanding the unspoken request to watch over the child. The heavy-set biker with brass knuckles charged from the left while the lanky one came from the right, a predictable pincer movement that James had seen countless times in street brawls. Their mistake was assuming he would be intimidated by their numbers. James moved like flowing water, his movements economical and precise. He sidestepped the heavy-set biker's charge, using the man's own momentum to send him stumbling forward. In the same fluid motion, he blocked the lanky biker's wild swing, deflecting it harmlessly aside. "Last warning," James announced, his voice carrying across the now-silent crowd. "Stand down." His eyes remained focused, his breathing controlled. This wasn't anger or revenge. just a pure professional response to a threat. Snake, enraged by his missed punch, pulled out a small pocket knife. The metallic click of the blade opening caused gasps from the onlooking crowd. Several people shouted warnings to James, but he had already noted the weapon's appearance. "That was a mistake," James said quietly, his tone almost sympathetic. Drawing a weapon had just escalated this from simple assault to armed assault, a fact that Snake's alcohol-addled brain hadn't considered. The scraggly bearded biker tried to grab James from behind, but years of close-quarters combat training kicked in. James ducked and pivoted, using his attacker's forward momentum to send him sprawling into Snake, causing both men to stumble. The knife clattered to the ground, kicked away by James' precise foot movement. "He's making us look stupid," the biker with the limp shouted, throwing a haymaker punch that James easily avoided. The biker's poor balance, compromised by his injury, left him completely open for a simple shoulder throw that sent him rolling across the pavement. The heavy-set biker had regained his footing and charged again, brass knuckles now clearly visible. James met this threat with mechanical precision, locking the armed hand while simultaneously delivering a sharp strike to the man's solar plexus. The biker dropped to his knees, gasping for air, brass knuckles falling from his grip. Snake, having untangled himself from his scraggly bearded companion, launched another attack. This time, James didn't just evade, he controlled. Using techniques perfected in military combat training, he caught Snake's arm, twisted it behind his back, and applied just enough pressure to demonstrate complete control without causing serious injury. "Feel that?" James asked quietly, his mouth close to Snake's ear. "That's what real training feels like. Not bar fights, not gang scuffles. Professional combat experience." The remaining bikers froze, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. They were dealing with someone far beyond their level of experience, someone who had faced real combat situations rather than just barroom brawls. From her position by the bench, Sarah watched with a mixture of fear and pride. She had never seen her father in action before, and had only heard stories about his military service. Now she understood why her mother always said he was a hero. Not because he fought, but because he fought only when necessary and with absolute control. "Daddy," Sarah called out, her voice steady now. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," James replied, maintaining his hold on Snake while keeping the other bikers in his sight. "Everything's under control." The crowd had grown even larger, their phones still recording every moment. Several security guards could be seen pushing their way through the mass of people, their radios crackling with calls for police backup. Snake, his face pressed against the railing, finally showed signs of surrendering. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the sobering realization that he and his friends had picked the wrong target. The breaking point had come and gone, and James had handled it with the perfect balance of force and restraint. As the security guards finally reached the scene, it was clear to everyone watching that this would be a day these bikers would never forget. The day they learned that true strength lies not in intimidation but in control. The park security guards arrived to find a scene that looked more like a military training demonstration than a typical amusement park fight. James still held Snake in a controlled hold, while the other 4 bikers were scattered around, each in various states of defeat but none seriously injured. "Sir, we can take it from here," the lead security guard announced, approaching cautiously. He was an older man with gray hair and a veteran's pin on his uniform. One look at James' stance and control told him everything he needed to know about the situation. James nodded professionally and carefully released Snake, stepping back in a way that maintained his defensive position while allowing the security team to take control. Snake stumbled forward, rubbing his shoulder, all his previous bravado replaced with embarrassment and lingering shock. "That man attacked us," the scraggly bearded biker shouted, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. His accusation was immediately met with a chorus of disagreement from the crowd. "I've got it all on video," a teenager called out, holding up his phone. "They were harassing everyone in line, and then they tried to grab the little girl." Other voices joined in, dozens of witnesses eager to share their recordings and accounts of what had transpired. The security guards' body cameras were also recording as they collected statements and secured the scene. Sarah ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. James picked her up, holding her close as she buried her face in his shoulder. "You were so brave, Daddy," she whispered. The heavy-set biker, still catching his breath from the strike to his solar plexus, watched the father-daughter moment with a mix of shame and revelation. His brass knuckles lay on the ground where they'd fallen, now being photographed by security as evidence. "The police are on their way," the lead security guard announced, addressing both parties. "We'll need statements from everyone involved." He turned to James, recognition in his eyes. "Marine Corps? Army Staff Sergeant, 3rd Infantry Division." James replied quietly, still holding Sarah. The guard nodded respectfully. "Thought so. Saw that CQC training kick in clean takedowns, minimal force used." He turned to the bikers with a stern expression. "You boys picked the wrong man to harass today." Snake, his tough guy persona completely shattered, seemed to age years in minutes as the reality of his situation sank in. Armed assault, attempting to harm a child, disturbing the peace. The charges were piling up in his mind. The lanky biker with the shaved head suddenly spoke up, his voice surprisingly sincere. "Look, man, we were way out of line. We didn't know you were military. We just thought." "That's the problem," James interrupted calmly. "You shouldn't need to know someone's background to treat them and their child with respect." His words carried no anger, just the weight of truth. Local police officers arrived, their presence adding another layer of authority to the scene as they began taking statements and collecting evidence, including the knife and brass knuckles. The crowd slowly started to disperse. A park manager hurried over, apologizing profusely to James and Sarah. "Sir, we're so sorry about this incident. Your quick thinking prevented what could have been a very dangerous situation." Snake and his gang were being handcuffed and led away by the police, their faces a mix of anger, embarrassment, and the dawning realization of the consequences of their actions. Several of the onlookers applauded as they were escorted out. "Daddy," Sarah said, finally lifting her head from his shoulder, "can we still ride the roller coaster?" James smiled, relieved to see his daughter's spirit unchanged by the incident. "Of course we can, princess. We don't let bullies ruin our day, right?" The park manager quickly intervened. "Please allow us to upgrade you to VIP passes for the rest of the day. It's the least we can do." As the excitement died down and the regular flow of the park resumed, James took a moment to check for any signs of trauma, but his daughter surprised him. Her eyes were bright with admiration. "Mom was right," she said proudly. "You are a hero, not because you're strong, but because you protected everyone and didn't even get angry." James hugged his daughter tighter, grateful that this potentially dangerous situation had turned into a teaching moment about standing up to bullies and using strength responsibly. The day was far from ruined. In fact, it had become even more memorable than either of them could have imagined. The next hour at Cedar Point Amusement Park unfolded like a well-orchestrated procedure. 2 police cars and a park security golf cart were parked near the roller coaster entrance, their presence drawing curious glances from passing parkgoers. Inside a nearby security office, James sat calmly with Sarah as multiple witnesses came forward to give their statements. Officer Martinez, a seasoned police veteran, reviewed the numerous cell phone videos that parkgoers had eagerly shared. Each recording showed the same story from different angles: the biker's intimidation, James' repeated attempts to de-escalate, and his controlled defensive actions when they attacked. Staff Sergeant Morrison, Officer Martinez said, looking up from his tablet, "I've seen a lot of fight videos in my career, but this..." He paused, shaking his head in admiration. "This was textbook perfect defensive technique. You showed remarkable restraint." Sarah sat next to her father, sipping a strawberry smoothie that the park manager had brought her. She watched with interest as a steady stream of witnesses came through, each eager to share their version of events. Those men were terrorizing everyone in line. A mother of 3 testified, her children nodding vigorously beside her. This gentleman only acted when they tried to grab his daughter. He protected all of us, really. The young ride operator, still looking somewhat shaken, described how the bikers had been causing trouble even before reaching James and Sarah. "I called security right away, but I was scared they'd hurt someone before help arrived. Then this guy, he gestured respectfully toward James. He handled it like a real professional. Park security had retrieved the confiscated weapons, Snake's pocket knife and the brass knuckles, carefully documenting them as evidence. The lead security guard, Tom Wilson, a former Marine himself, examined them with a grim expression. Carrying concealed weapons in a family amusement park, Wilson muttered, securing the items in an evidence bag. They're looking at serious charges here. Outside the security office, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread through the park about the soldier who had protected his daughter and others from a gang of troublemaking bikers. Several veterans among the parkgoers waited to shake James' hand. Detective Sarah Chun arrived to take charge of the case, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. The DA's office will want to review this, she said, watching one of the videos. We've had problems with this motorcycle group before, but never anything this brazen. The park's legal team arrived, led by a concerned-looking woman in a business suit. After reviewing the situation, she turned to James, relief evident on her face. Your actions were completely justified and probably saved the park from a much worse incident. We'd like to offer you and your daughter lifetime season passes as a token of our appreciation. Sarah's eyes lit up at this news, momentarily forgetting the scary incident from earlier. Really? We can come back whenever we want? James smiled at his daughter's. James maintained his professional demeanor as he completed his statement, detailing each interaction with the bikers, explaining his attempts to de-escalate, and his eventual defensive actions when they became violent. And you said you're currently on leave? Detective Chun asked, making notes. Yes, ma'am. Just returned from my third tour in Afghanistan 2 weeks ago. Today was supposed to be a special father-daughter day. James squeezed Sarah's hand gently. The park manager, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward again, which is exactly what it still should be. We've arranged for VIP treatment for the rest of your stay today. Front-of-line access to all rides, complimentary meals, whatever you need. As the paperwork and statements were finalized, news arrived that all 5 bikers had been booked at the local police station. They were facing multiple charges, including attempted assault, carrying concealed weapons in a public space, and endangering minors. Daddy, Sarah said as they prepared to leave the security office, can we still try that roller coaster? I'm not scared anymore. Not with you here. Officer Martinez smiled at this, closing his notebook. You've got a brave daughter there, Staff Sergeant, and she's got a brave father. You two go enjoy the rest of your day. You've more than earned it. As they stepped out of the security office into the bright sunlight, applause broke out from the waiting crowd. James, ever humble, simply nodded in acknowledgement, taking Sarah's hand as they headed back toward the roller coaster, ready to continue their special day, now with an unexpected story they'd never forget. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Cedar Point as James and Sarah made their way back to the roller coaster, now armed with their VIP passes. The incident with the bikers had created an unexpected ripple effect throughout the park, turning them into minor celebrities for the day. As they walked, people smiled and nodded respectfully at James, some even stopping to shake his hand. Parents pointed him out to their children, using the incident as a teaching moment about standing up to bullies the right way. Sarah walked proudly beside her father, her head held high, occasionally waving at people who recognized them. Mr. Morrison, called out a familiar voice. They turned to see Mike, a retired Army sergeant who had been in the crowd earlier. He approached with his teenage son. I just wanted to say, watching you handle those guys reminded me of our CQC training days. You didn't throw a single unnecessary punch. That's real military discipline right there. James nodded modestly, shaking Mike's hand. Just did what any of us would have done, protecting the civilians first. A group of young boys around Sarah's age approached them timidly. One of them, gathering his courage, spoke up. Sir, is it true you're a real soldier? Our dad says you took down 5 bad guys without even getting mad. James knelt down to their level, his voice gentle but serious. Being a soldier isn't about fighting. It's about protecting people and knowing when not to fight. Sometimes being strong means walking away, and sometimes it means standing your ground, but always with control. The park had transformed their experience from an unpleasant incident into something special. The roller coaster operator, a different one from earlier, recognized them immediately and ushered them to the front of the line. Sarah got to choose their seats, front row, of course. As they climbed the first big hill, Sarah grabbed her father's hand. "Daddy, I was scared when those men were being mean, but I wasn't scared of them. I was scared they might hurt you." James squeezed her hand gently. "That's very brave of you, sweetheart. But remember what I told you about my training. Sometimes people who look tough aren't as tough as they think, and sometimes quiet strength is the most powerful kind." The roller coaster plunged down its first drop, and Sarah's fears transformed into screams of delight. They rode it 3 more times, taking advantage of their VIP passes, each time trying different seats. During their complimentary dinner at the park's best restaurant, several families stopped by their table to express their gratitude. One mother, with tears in her eyes, explained how her son had been bullied at school and how seeing James stand up to the bikers had given him courage. "Your daddy did something really special today," an elderly veteran told Sarah as he passed their table. "He showed everyone that real heroes don't need to show off or be mean. They just need to be brave and do what's right." The park manager visited them again during dinner, bringing a special dessert for Sarah, an ice cream sundae decorated to look like a soldier's medal. "We've reviewed all our security protocols," he informed James. "Your handling of the situation helped us identify several areas where we can improve park safety." As the day began winding down, they found themselves back near the spot where the incident had occurred. The area had returned to normal, with families laughing and children playing. No sign of the earlier confrontation remained. "Look, Daddy." Sarah pointed to a gift shop window where a small crowd had gathered. Someone had posted one of the videos of the incident, and people were watching it on their phones. In the footage, James' movements were calm and precise, each action measured and controlled. A park photographer approached them, offering to take their picture in front of the roller coaster. As they posed, Sarah sitting on her father's shoulders, other parkgoers gathered around, wanting to be in the photo too. It turned into an impromptu celebration of standing up to bullying and protecting others. "You know what, Princess?" James said as they looked at the photo on the photographer's camera. "Sometimes the best days aren't the ones we plan, but the ones where we learn something important." Sarah nodded wisely. Like how being brave doesn't mean not being scared, it means doing the right thing even when you are scared. James smiled proudly at his daughter's insight. The incident had turned their simple father-daughter day into something more meaningful. A lesson about courage, control, and standing up for what's right, all while creating memories they would cherish forever. As the sun began to set over Cedar Point, casting an orange glow across the park, James and Sarah found a quiet bench near the illuminated carousel. The day's excitement had transformed into a peaceful evening, perfect for their final moments at the park. Sarah was finishing her second ice cream cone of the day, a special treat after such an eventful experience. "Daddy," Sarah began thoughtfully, watching the carousel horses move up and down in their endless dance. "Today was different from what we planned, wasn't it?" James smiled, wiping a spot of vanilla ice cream from his daughter's chin with a napkin. "Life often is, sweetheart. Sometimes the most important moments are the ones we don't plan for." A few feet away, a young boy was telling his friends about what he had witnessed earlier. The soldier didn't even yell or get angry. The boy exclaimed, making karate chop motions in the air. He was like a superhero, but real. Sarah giggled at the boy's enthusiasm, then turned serious. "Those men were really big and scary, but you weren't scared at all." "How do you do that, Daddy?" James thought carefully about his answer, wanting to turn this moment into a valuable lesson for his daughter. "Actually, I was a little scared," he admitted. "But being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means doing what's right even when you are afraid." A cool evening breeze carried the distant sounds of the roller coaster and happy screams from other rides. The park lights were twinkling on, creating a magical atmosphere as darkness approached. "In the army," James continued, "we learned something very important. The strongest person isn't the one who can fight the best. It's the one who knows when to fight and, more importantly, when not to fight." Sarah nodded, processing this information. "Like how you tried to talk to those men first." "Exactly." James smiled. "I tried to solve the problem with words before anything else. That's always the first step. Violence should only ever be the very last option. And even then, you should use just enough to protect yourself and others, no more. A family walking past recognized them and waved warmly. Their teenage daughter called out, "Thank you for making the park safer today." Sarah waved back, beaming with pride. "You know what I learned today, Daddy?" Sarah said, finishing her ice cream. "I learned that heroes don't look like they do in movies. They look like regular people who do the right thing when it's hard." James felt his heart swell with pride. His daughter had taken away exactly the right message from today's events. "That's very wise, Princess. You know what? You were a hero today too." "Me?" Sarah looked surprised. "But I didn't do anything. I was just scared. You showed courage by staying calm, following instructions, and being brave even when you were frightened. That's what real bravery looks like." The carousel music played softly in the background as they watched more families enjoying their evening at the park. The incident from earlier had created a unique bond among the parkgoers. Strangers smiling at each other, parents discussing the importance of standing up to bullies, children pretending to be brave protectors. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Sarah asked hopefully, yawning despite her best efforts to stay alert. The excitement of the day was finally catching up with her. "Well, we do have lifetime passes now," James chuckled, picking up his tired daughter. "But maybe we should rest tomorrow. It's been quite an adventure today." As they walked toward the park exit, Sarah resting her head on her father's shoulder, several park employees and security guards nodded respectfully. The day shift was ending, and news of the incident had spread through the entire staff. "Daddy," Sarah mumbled sleepily. "Yes, Princess? I'm glad those mean men picked on us instead of someone else because you knew how to stop them without really hurting them. That's what makes you a real hero." James kissed his daughter's forehead, touched by her insight. The day had given them more than just memories of rides and cotton candy. It had provided valuable lessons about courage, restraint, and standing up for what's right. As they passed through the park gates, Sarah now fast asleep in his arms, James reflected on how this day, which could have been ruined by violence, had instead become a powerful teaching moment about true strength and real heroism. Sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected situations, and today, both father and daughter had learned something valuable about what it truly means to be brave.